Good morning. It is the morning of day 13, and we're almost to the end of our 2-week journey to make a beautiful sourdough starter together. I'm happy that you're able to join me, and I've had such a good time. I hope that this has helped you learn how to take care of your starter, how to create it. And at the end here, we're going to start making some loaves. So I'm going to show you exactly how to make a leaven and how I do it and how I have success, and then some of the recipes that I use to make boules and other loaves. So let's take a look at our starters this morning. And first, let's take a look at our plan. We're going to check on our starters and make some observations. Then we're going to do our starter readiness test before we feed and prepare for tomorrow. So let's get to it. Here are my starters all snuggled up with their hot water bottle. Betty, our brown rice starter, it looks like I didn't quite feed her enough last night. I missed the peak, and that's okay because I'm not planning on making 11 this morning with her. And it's not, we'll look on the top, but it doesn't look like there is any liquid on the top, any hooch or anything. So it's just started to fall. If you've heard that you can taste your starter to try to find out what stage of life it's at, you absolutely can. I don't like to, which is why I haven't mentioned it, but smell, taste, and appearance are all part of the readiness test. So your starter will taste a little more sweet and almost milky-like when it's young. It will start to taste more yeasty and kind of along with the smell, how you would expect it to taste as it's a mature starter, a little sweet and just a tinge of sourness. But as it becomes old and becomes more acidic, you're going to taste the acidity in the taste of the starter. So it's up to you whether you want to use this taste test, but it is very reliable, apparently. And I have tried it and I agree it does work. I just don't like to taste my starters because I don't enjoy it, but I recommend you trying it and see how it goes. Now with our brown rice starter, we can see how different that pillowy effect is. Really, if we gave these just a little bit of a feed this morning, they would be ready to create a leaven in a couple of hours. So now you may be thinking, how do I know if my leaven's ready in a couple of hours? Well, I've created a readiness checkbox so you can decide if your starter is a mature starter and at its peak activity and ready to mix a leaven. So the first thing we need to look at is to use the rise timer. We're going to do that this afternoon or this evening, whichever fits your schedule. Then is to look at the appearance, which we've been talking about all along. Does it have those signs of being a mature starter? Does it smell like a mature starter? And of course, there's a last box if you'd like to decide to taste it. Does it taste like a mature starter? And if you say yes to all of those, then it's time to make a leaven, and we're going to do that tomorrow. So make sure to do the rise timer either this afternoon or this evening after your feed. And don't worry, it's really simple, but we need to do this rise timer in order to figure out the timing for your baking of your bread. So let's go ahead and start to discard and feed our starters while I talk to you about the readiness checkbox. So I'm going to feed my starter and I want to find out the time that it takes to reach its peak. So I'm going to keep the feed the same as we have been doing. Then I have a base to know how long does it take when I feed this amount, and I keep it at room temperature. So I'll discard all but 30 grams and feed 50 grams of flour and 60 grams of water. So the reason that we want to know this time to peak is that we need to be able to have the best activity, the most activity out of the yeast possible. And the best way to do that is to always feed our starter when it's at its peak. Because if we know exactly how long it takes our starter to reach its maximum rise, then we're able to feed it at that time and plan our schedule for baking our bread around that. So this is why it's important to do the rise timer. So, okay, what is this rise timer I'm talking about? It's just a name that I gave to a sort of basic scientific process that we're going to do that will measure the time that it takes for the starter to reach its peak. But of course, this will change with changes in the environment. So you do have to do this rise timer test throughout the year when the weathers change, or if your starter is changing environment in any way, different changes of water or possibly even changes of flour. So all of the factors that we talked about really in our 3 keys to success will impact not only the health of the starter, but also the peak rise time. So it's super important
important to know the time to peak because that will give you the maximum rise to your bread. If you feed your starter to create your leaven when it's at its peak, and then you use your leaven when it's at its peak, then you will always get the maximum rise possible because you have the maximum yeast activity and the most carbon dioxide produced. Really, the amount of rise that you get from your bread and the amount of open crumb that you get really has to do with the health of your starter and the timing of creation of your dough. So now you're probably wondering, well, how do I do it? Let's get to it. Well, it's simple science, really. You're just going to observe and record. I'm going to show you in this video exactly what to do with some photographs of my starters. So we will go through that now. Right below this post is this readiness checkbox, so feel free to print this off so that you can use it at home. Just for a quick review, a mature starter is a starter that's at its peak activity. The yeast has produced the maximum amount of CO2 and it's at its maximum activity. That gives it this nice domed top. There's valleys and peaks that are a little inflated. It's risen at least 30% of its height, sometimes even doubled. So the yeast is at its maximum activity, so therefore it's the most effective starter to give a good rise to your dough by making a great, powerful leaven. So now that we've been reminded of what the mature starter looks like, we can start filling out our readiness checklist. First, we need to do our rise timer. So we're going to watch our starter after we feed. Our elastic band is our start time. Then every 30 minutes to 1 hour, check on your starter and draw a line at the level that the starter is at that time. Then you can see how far your starter has risen, and it's quite fascinating to see at the different stages of the life cycle of your colony of microorganisms how quickly your starter will grow. Remember that the temperature affects this as well. So if it's really cold, it's going to rise a lot slower than if it's really warm, it's going to rise really quickly. So you're going to need to check your starter at intervals based on what you see happening. Then basically you just watch your starter, and when you see that it has peaked and the next time you check it has lowered a bit, you calculate the exact number of hours that it took in order for your starter to reach its maximum peak activity. And remember, all starters are different. So some will rise and double, and some will only increase about a third. And it really depends on the strength of the colony and the type of flour that you've used. But you can see here, I'm using my wheat starter, and you can see where it has risen to the peak and then it has dropped. So that's why it's important to see that line. We can see that it never went above that line. So 1:30 was the peak activity. So I know that between 10 a.m., I fed my starters late this morning, and 1:30 it peaked and it more than doubled in its height. And you can see here with the gluten-free starters at just after 11 a.m., they haven't peaked yet either. However, it doesn't rise nearly as much as the wheat starter, and that's to be expected. You'll also notice that the different types of flour that you use are going to give you completely different peak times and peak rises as well. So this is my sorghum starter, and you can see that it almost doubles in height and has this poofy cloud type appearance, whereas my brown rice starter only rose about a third of its height, and that's totally acceptable, and this is actually good to use for a leaven. So we want our starter to be at least 1/3 of its height within 4 hours for a gluten-free starter and double its height within 4 hours for a wheat starter. And once you see that it has reached its peak and it has fallen back down, record the time. If you're within the time frame, you're all set to go. And please remember that the temperature definitely affects this time to peak rise. So if your home is very cold and your starter isn't able to stay within the ideal temperature range, it will take longer than 4 hours potentially. And I want you to be totally prepared for tomorrow, and I hope you're as excited as I am to make our first loaf. So we're going to start with the preparing of our starter tomorrow. So make sure you have enough water, and if you're going to make your own aquafaba, make sure you get that going as well. Gather the rest of your supplies and complete your readiness checklist, and I can't wait to start with you tomorrow. And if you've enjoyed this series so far, I'd be ever so grateful if you would write a comment in the section below and give it a star rating. This is how Google finds me and my site and my recipes, and so more people can find them. And I would be ever so grateful if you would also share this ultimate video guide photograph pin that I have right below this video onto your Pinterest page. Thanks so much. So make sure you observe and record your starter's height for your rise timer either this morning or this evening after its feed. Just make sure if you do it this evening that you feed early enough that you have enough time for it to reach its peak rise. Have a great day. I'll see you soon.